I'm so glad that you joined me today. We are going to be continuing our journey through Isaiah this week, and we're going to be taking a look at Isaiah 40, verses 18 through 31. And let's go ahead and pray before we dive in, though. God, I thank you so much for today. I thank you for the time that we can gather together and open your word. I pray that as we read these words written down so long ago, God, that you will speak to our hearts, that you will teach us something, and you will transform us. Jesus, we love you, and we pray all of this in your holy and precious name. Amen. So as I said, we're going to be in Isaiah 40 today. Last week, we were in the story of Hezekiah, so the part of Isaiah that we have the story of King Hezekiah of Judah, and we got a glimpse into his kingdom and his rule of Judah and what was happening during his lifetime. And we discussed how Hezekiah chose to trust God and to trust God for deliverance, to trust God to help them when they were faced with enemies, and that's how we left things. Now, if we look back a couple chapters, or one chapter back from to Isaiah 39, we get the conclusion of the story of Hezekiah, and there's an interesting story, and you should definitely go back and read it. The envoys from Babylon come to visit, and Hezekiah shows them his whole kingdom, and then Isaiah comes to him and tells him this prophecy that, you showed them your whole kingdom and you showed them everything in your palace. And God says that there's going to be a day when everything that you see, everything that you own is going to be carried off to Babylon. And Hezekiah is just a little, like, we get this prophecy, and Hezekiah responds, well, the word of the Lord is good, and at least this isn't going to happen while I'm king. There'll be peace while I'm alive, and it'll be later on. Isaiah 39 ends on this note of judgment, this note of exile is coming. Judah is no longer going to be the kingdom that you know it to be, that your descendants will be carried off to Babylon. And that's where we end in 39. And then 40 starts off with the very opposite. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her that her hard service has been completed, that her sin has been paid for, and that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. And so it starts off on this note of comfort. It starts off on this note of that the time has come for God to deliver. And it's such a contrast. So in some ways, Isaiah has gone into the future. This is what this prophecy is. It's a prophecy into the future during the time of exile. So people are exiled, taken off to exile in Babylon. And this is the word that is to sustain them. And so we get to this point in Isaiah 40, and this first part, the first 11 verses, we get this picture that God indeed will deliver. There is this note of comfort. There's this note of hope, and that God will deliver. We see in verses 3 through 5, a voice of one calling, in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. And it goes on to describe how the mountains should be flattened and the valleys should be raised. So this highway will be not filled with any obstacles, and God can come quickly, and he can come and deliver his people. And so that's what it starts off with in Isaiah 40. Such a stark contrast to the way Isaiah 39 ends. And so then from there, Isaiah moves on and starts to describe God. And we're going to read part of that description starting in verse 18 in a few minutes. But then he starts the description much earlier. And so he describes God and says things like, who has measured the waters in his hand? Or who has marked off the heavens? Who can hold all the dust of the earth in a basket? And he's just painting this picture of God, of God who is so grand, and God who is so big, and a God who could definitely deliver. He can deliver. He's able to deliver his people, even in the midst of exile, when everything seems lost, when all hope seems completely gone. God can deliver. And so that is where Isaiah is going to camp out in this part that we're going to read today, is this description of God and building a picture of a God who is able to deliver. And it's words of hope to those who are experiencing this exile. And we'll go and dive in a little bit more in depth. And then this chapter is going to close with 27 through 31 with some very familiar words, and we'll discuss those as well. But it closes on this note of hope of how God is going to strengthen those who are in exile, those who are weary and who are out of energy and out of strength. And that's where it's going to close. So we are going to, without further ado, go ahead and read verses 18 through 31 and go ahead and read that entire part for our passage today. And then we're going to dive in a little bit more deeply into it. So Isaiah 40, 18 through 31 says this, and I'm reading out of the NIV today. So you can follow along in whatever translation you have. Right, I've chosen the NIV. With whom then will you compare God? To what image will you liken him? As for an idol, a metal worker casts it, and a goldsmith overlays it with gold and fashions silver chains for it. A person too poor to present such an offering selects wood that will not rot. For they look for a skilled worker to set up an idol that will not topple. Did you not know? Have you not heard? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood since the earth was founded? He sits enthroned above the circle of the earth, and its people are like grasshoppers. He stretches out the heavens like a canopy and spreads them out like a tent to live in. He brings princes to naught and reduces the rulers of this world to nothing. No sooner are they planted, no sooner are they sown, no sooner do they take root in the ground than he blows on them and they wither. And a whirlwind sweeps them away like chaff. To whom will you compare me? Or who is my equal, says the Holy One. Lift up your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these? He who brings out the starry host one by one and calls forth each of them by name. Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing. Why do you complain, Jacob? Why do you say, Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord? My cause is disregarded by my God. Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. What a word for Isaiah to present to the people who are in exile. And as I read this, to prepare for this, and as I was reading just now, I was just imagining these people who heard these words for the first time, who were facing exile, who were facing complete destruction of everything they knew, who were carted off to another land. Yeah, like their very way of life was completely disrupted. Their way of practicing their faith was just completely thrown out the window. There was no more temple. There was nothing for them. And yet to hear these words about God, to hear these words of hope. So let's take a little bit deeper look. So as I said, Isaiah is painting a picture of God, and he starts it outside of our verses for today that our curriculum is focusing on. But he continues to focus on this picture of God. And so it starts off in verse 18, and he talks about how God is not an idol. And he talks about some of this difference, that God is not made by a metal worker and covered in gold, and that a person who is going to be looking for an idol that's not going to fall over. And it reminded me of that scene in 1 Samuel whenever the Philistines have captured the Ark of the Covenant, and they put it in their I said their temple or wherever their god was, and the god Dagon fell down before the ark, before the place of God's presence. And I think I've always thought that's such an interesting story in Scripture, and you can find that in 1 Samuel. But that's that image I get here, is that idols topple over, they fall over, they're just statues. They're made by human hands. And I mean, when you think about how Isaiah's been building this picture of a God who's the creator, and we see that even later in this passage for today, the God who set the stars in the sky and who created everything that is, everything that we can see. How could that creator be created by something that he created? It's completely illogical. The sole creator of all that is, of all that we can see and all that we experience cannot be created by something else, not by human hands. God is. God was, God is, God always will be. That is the God who is speaking to Isaiah to give these words to the people. The God who is the creator of everything. And he's not just the creator of everything, he is also the ruler of everything. It talks here about how he brings the princes to naught. He brings reduces the rulers of the world to nothing. Who are they? They didn't create the world, right? No sooner are they established than God, then they are just like grass and they wither away. They're temporary. God's not temporary. So who can we compare to God? Who? That's what he says here. To whom will you compare me? Who is my equal? Says the Holy One. Well, we know the answer is no one. No one is equal to God. God is so holy. God is so wholly other than we are. He is transcendent, meaning he is other than us. He is above. He is outside of who we are. He is wholly other than humanity in our world. He's transcendent. And this picture, I can imagine this picture of the sole creator God, this holy, transcendent, perfect, huge, unfathomable God, being the one who cares about these people. I hear hope in those words. This is the God that you worship. This is the God. This is who he is. He's the supreme ruler. He is transcendent. But we aren't left with only the transcendence, right? We're not just left with the God who put the stars in the sky, who called them by name, who has great power and mighty strength. And the God who is incomparable, who is enthroned above the circle of the earth, and the people are like grasshoppers to him. We aren't left with this picture of the transcendent God. We are brought back here starting in verse 27 with a different picture. And so we'll get to that. We are brought here in 27. So we see this complaint that the people are experiencing. Why do you complain, Jacob? Why do you say, Israel? My way is hidden from the Lord. My cause is disregarded by my God. I can imagine how the people were feeling. They felt like God had forgotten them, that he no longer was interested in them. They were in exile. Everything they knew had been wiped off the face of the earth. And I can imagine how just utterly hopeless they felt and how forgotten they felt. But yet Isaiah is saying, don't you remember? Haven't you heard? God is everlasting. He doesn't end, and he doesn't grow tired, and he doesn't grow weary. And his understanding is unfathomable. And I love this, because the problem is they think that God's forgotten them. And Isaiah responds with the answer is theology. The answer is to remember God. Remember who God is. Remember that he is a big God. Remember that he is capable of everything. It doesn't matter that Babylon is in power. It doesn't matter if it was the Assyrians in power, because ultimately God is king. God is the one who is over all. He is the supreme ruler. So he is not bound by the things that we are bound by in our world. He's not bound by national boundaries. He's not bound by power that different countries have or different nations have. He is not bound by those same things because he is God and he is transcendent. But he's a God who gives strength to those who are weary. He's a God who gives power to those who are weak. And he is a God who gives strength. And it's not just any sort of strength. It is strength that is described as people be able to grow wings and soar like eagles. Think about that kind of strength that will pick an eagle. Imagine the largest eagle you've ever seen, or like a bald eagle, or I know there's much bigger ones. But just to think about the amount of strength that would take to pick up a bird. And I know there's dynamics of flight and stuff that I don't fully understand. So I know they soar and like fly on like air currents and all different things. And so that's not really what I'm talking about. I'm just thinking of this picture of the strength that lifts up from sitting, from lying on the ground, from being like, you think about a bird being on the ground, they can start to fly from being all the way down on the ground. And think about the amount of strength that, the picture of strength, that not the amount of strength, but the picture of strength that is, that God is a God who gives us the kind of strength that lifts us up and makes us light and be able to fly. That's the kind of strength we're talking about. It's not just, oh, I did some exercise and I got stronger. It's this strength that just lifts us up completely and enables us to be able to keep going, enables us to be able to walk whenever we would rather stop and rest and faint from tiredness, or run whenever we're so weary. We're in the last mile of running a marathon and we have nothing left. Or maybe not even a marathon. We're just running a mile and we're not used to running. And so we're just exhausted, and God lifts us up. That's the picture that we have here. That's the God who doesn't just stay transcendent. He's a God who is intimately involved in the lives of his people. And he wants to have a relationship with each one of us. And it's an intimate relationship. And he is a God who shares strength with us, who gives us strength, who fills us up, and who allows us to soar when we are feeling exhausted and we're feeling weary. So he's also immanent. He's also close, very close. He's transcendent. He's big. He's capable of delivering because he's so big, but yet he's so personal and he's so immanent and he's so with us that he is, that we are able to gain strength from him. And I think that as I think through this, I mean, I can't help but think about Jesus, right? And we have the picture we see Jesus, the portraits of him painted throughout the Gospels and all of the New Testament writings about him, and how he was 100% God and he was 100% human. And in Jesus, we have the transcendence and the immanence come together. And it's such a beautiful picture. And if you think about Philippians 2, we have the Christ hymn in Philippians 2, 6 through 11. And Jesus is described as humbling himself and coming and setting aside his divine attributes and taking on the form of a servant, of a human, and doing life as we do life, but yet being God at the same time. And that he is the name above all names, the King above all kings. And it's just amazing. And it's hard to wrap our minds around, but I think that's one of the reasons why it makes me so excited, is that we can't wrap our minds completely around God. We can't even really wrap our minds completely around Jesus, because there's just so much that we don't understand. Our minds can't understand without having experienced him face to face, which we will do one day if we follow him. But I'm just so excited. I get so excited when I think about this, and I think about how a God who is as big as Isaiah is describing, who can hold all the dust of the earth in a basket and can weigh the mountains on scales. And I know this is figurative language, but if you think about the pictures that are painted with these words, God is that big that we can't comprehend, that we can't fathom him and completely. But yet he wants to do life with us. He wanted to come and become human in Jesus and be God with us. And that he wants to do work through us and that he wants us to be a part of the equation. It's just quite humbling when you think about it. And so that, I think that is why these words are filled with hope in those times whenever you think about the people who are hearing these words for the first time. They were facing exile, and we may not be facing exile from our home. We may not be facing anything of that magnitude, but I would imagine that all of us have felt overlooked or forgotten by God at some point in our lives, if we were truly honest, and we've asked God, are you sure you're still there? Are you still with me? But these words give us hope that God is indeed with us. This God who is all powerful, who is the creator of everything, is with us, and he gives us strength, and he enables us to carry forward. And we can have hope, that certainty, not just, oh yeah, I hope that happens. No, the certainty that comes with hope, the confidence, the faithful confidence that we know that God is still calling us forward, that he is still writing a story, and that we're still a part of it. And that is awesome. So I hope that you really enjoyed these words today. Isaiah is just filled with some awesome words. This is one of those passages that we talked about a few weeks ago that we hear a lot, right? We hear, oh yeah, mount up with wings like eagles. I'm sure you've probably heard it before. I know I've heard it countless times, or I've seen it on little plaques or whatever, but to actually sit with the words and to think about what Isaiah was saying to the people who heard it at first, and then what those words can say to us today, I think is just huge. And hope is what I hear over and over, that we have hope and that God gives us strength, and that he is the one who will continue to call us forward and call us further up and further into his presence. And that is beautiful, and that is awesome. And that is hope in any day, whether it's the worst day or the best day. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you're enjoying this journey through Isaiah. We'll be back next week as we continue our journey through Isaiah, and I can't wait to talk about it with you. Bye!